Okay, howdy everybody. I think we are good to go here. All right. Hope you're having a great day. And again, an early Pesach Sameach, a Chag Kosher Sameach wish to everybody. Let us jump right in here and pick up where we left off last week. So just again, by way of, this is part two of the different areas that we need to be thinking about when it comes to this year's celebration of Pesach. And that Pesach comes, Erev Pesach, the eve of Passover comes on Shabbat. And we articulated a number of problems, a number of issues that we have to think about that are different this year. For instance, we've talked about selling chametz. We talked about when do we burn our chametz? When do we do bittul chametz? You can't burn chametz on Shabbat. Normally we burn our chametz on Erev Pesach. Or for instance, we talked about when is the fast of the firstborns? When does that take place? So we did all this other stuff. But now we're going to talk about specifically on Shabbat, some of the unique areas that we need to really explore. And in particular, I want to focus on the Shabbat meals. For example, we know that we always have Lecha Mishnah. We have to have 2 loaves of bread at our Shabbat meals. So how does that work on Shabbat when Erev Pesach is on Shabbat? And also thinking about other elements that have to do with Shabbat, like Sudah Shlishit, the third meal, and other things like that, that it could impact potentially our ability to observe Shabbat and the Erev Pesach at the same time, and how we work that out this coming year. So before we do anything about that, I want to just talk out loud about an interesting concept about working on Erev Pesach. So there is a custom, the Gemara talks about, that one is forbidden to work on Erev Pesach. So take a look here in the Gemara. Let me share my screen with you. You can see the Gemara itself. Here we go. So the Gemara says as follows. Makom Shana, this is based on a Mishnah. For those of you who study the Mishnahs with us, you'll be familiar with this. So Makom Shana Gulasot Malacha Ba'arvei Pesachim Ad Chatzot Osin. So in a place where people were accustomed to do labor on Erev Pesach only until midday, until Chatzot, they would do it. That's the custom. You follow the local custom. Makom Shana Gu Shalola. So in a place where their custom was not to do Malacha at all, Ein Osin. So then they don't do Malacha at all. So what about a person who goes from one place to the other? So if you go to a place where they did malacha before chatzos to a place that they didn't do malacha at all, or a place the opposite, a place that they didn't do any malacha. And again, by malacha we mean work. Like, are you, like normally on a regular Pesach, on Erev Pesach, there's this debate about whether or not a person should go to work at all. So the answer, so what do you do if you have different customs? You go from one city to the next, you're visiting relatives. So notnin alav chumrei makom sheyatza misham v'chumrei makom shehalach l'sham. So the answer is the sages impose upon them the stringencies of both the place that they left and the stringencies of the place that they went. In other words, you don't, in both cases, you would not do any malacha, you wouldn't do labor. And the Mishnah continues, v'al yeshana adam mibnei hamachloket. A person should not deviate from the local customs because of disputes, kayotzebo, and similarly, hamolich perut shviv makom shekulo lemakom shelo kalu. If a person transports fruit that came from a Shemitah year from a place where a crop has ceased in the fields to a place where it's not yet ceased, etc. So chayav leva'ir, a person needs to remove that produce from his possession, because again, you want to follow the stringencies of both locations. And this is just a general important idea that we try to do whatever we can to avoid, machloket. I know it's surprising. Jews, we don't like to have machloket argument. And so we follow the stringencies of each place about performing labor on Erev Pesach. Now the question is why? Why do we not do malacha on Erev Pesach? What do you think? Why does the Mishnah suggest that we shouldn't do malacha at all on Erev Pesach?
Because we're too busy getting ready for Pesach.
Oh, okay, good. So that's one possibility. So we can suggest that we're getting ready for Pesach, and because we're getting ready for Pesach, a person should not be distracted by that, right? So Rashi says something similar, not exactly what you're saying, but similar to what you're suggesting. Rashi here suggests, what's the issue? Kedei shelo yetarud b'malacha v'yishkach bior chamso v'shchitat haPesach A person should not be occupied with his work and forget about destroying his chametz and all the other things that need to be prepared for that night. So similar to what we just said, is that we don't do any malacha on Erev Pesach, at least according to the lenient opinion from midday and on, because we don't want to run into a situation where a person is going to forget to destroy their chametz or any of the other Seder preparations. So that's Rashi's interpretation. Now the Yerushalmi offers a different take. The Yerushalmi suggests that working on Erev Pesach is forbidden because it's not right that we should be working or engaged in Malacha while your sacrifice, while your korban is actually being offered. Moshe Shapiro suggests that Now this is interesting because there's actually a practical difference between both Rashi's interpretation and the Yerushalmi's interpretation, okay? So, and in particular, when Erev Pesach comes on Shabbat. So according to Rashi, if it's about being concerned about destroying your chametz, should you be allowed to work on Friday this year, which is Erev Pesach, or not? When are we actually destroying the chametz, we said? It's going to be destroyed on Friday. We're going to burn our chametz on Friday, right? And we're going to sell our chametz on Friday. Can't do it on Shabbat. So according to Rashi, if the whole purpose of not working on Erev Pesach is because we need to make sure that we're focused on all of the things that needs to be prepared before the holiday, well, most of our preparations this year are going to be taking place on Friday, which is not Erev Pesach, it's Erev Pesach, right? It's Erev Shabbat, it's the eve of Shabbat, which Shabbat is the day before Pesach, because Pesach officially starts on Saturday night, but you can't do any preparations for Pesach on Shabbat. You're not allowed to do any of that. As we're going to see later in the class, if a person wants to prepare their romaine lettuce, if a person wants to prepare their Seder plates, all that has to happen before Shabbat. You're not allowed to prepare on Shabbat for after Shabbat. So according to Rashi, who says that the reason why you're not allowed to do work on Erev Pesach, it would seem, according to Rashi, that this year, on Friday, a week from this Friday, a person should also not work. A person should be stringent and not work, specifically because that is the time that a person should be preparing for all of the different elements of the Seder and selling their chametz, etc. According to the Yerushalmi, the Korban Pesach was offered anyways on Shabbat, and so it would be permissible to work on Friday because it wasn't brought on Friday, the Korban Pesach. Yerushalmi said that we don't work on Erev Pesach because it shouldn't be right that you should be engaged in work while the sacrifice is being offered. The sacrifice was offered on Shabbat. It wasn't offered on Friday anyways. And so according to Yerushalmi, Friday, a person should be able to work. And so this is a machloket, and it actually manifests itself in the commentaries with the Bir Halacha over here quoting both interpretations here in box 12. And he says that he's not sure what the right answer is, but he says, V'im kein efshar de'ein la'hachmer. A person could certainly be lenient this year and would not have a problem whatsoever and could work on Friday, but he does not issue a definitive ruling one way or the other. So a person who is able to take off the day on Friday, it would probably be advisable, but a person doesn't have to if they don't want to. There's no reason to be extra stringent unless you want to hold like Rashi's interpretation of the Gemara. So that's what that leads us to Shabbat itself. So let's talk Shabbat for a minute. So we know on Shabbat, on every Shabbat, we have 3 meals that we eat on Shabbat. We have Friday night, we have Shabbat morning, and we have something called Sudah Shlishit, which is the third meal. Now, on Shabbat, we're required to eat lechem mishnah. We're required to eat 2 loaves of bread at each meal. And so theoretically, so when Erev Pesach falls on Shabbat, we can fulfill this idea of eating 2 loaves of bread in 2 different ways. What are the 2 ways that we can do this? By eating bread or by eating matzah, right? Those are the 2 ways we can eat it. We can solve the problem, right? So either you can eat matzah, potentially, again, we're going to flesh this out. Either a person could eat matzah, or alternatively, a person could eat bread. Now, there are limitations. On Pesach itself, on Erev Pesach, on Shabbat, there are specific times, just like every year, you have to finish eating chametz by a certain time. So that means that if the answer is that we're going to fulfill our obligation by eating lechem mishnah, by eating 2 loaves of bread, if that's what we're going to do on Pesach, on Erev Pesach, on Shabbat, so you have to finish your bread by a certain time in the day. That's one option. The second possibility is eating matzah. But matzah has its own level of issues, which is that it's customary for us not to eat matzah on Erev Pesach. So we don't eat matzah on Erev Pesach, so then what are our options? Our options are to do what? Normally, Shalosh Shudas, normally Sudash Lishit happens in the afternoon. Normally lunchtime, most people eat lunch at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, or 12 o'clock we have lunch. Most of us are not eating lunch so early. So look at how the Shulchan Aruch codifies this. So just to start, the Shulchan Aruch tells us, and it's based on the Yerushalmi, it says, Asr lechol pat misha asirit ulamala. So it's usher to eat matzah on Erev Pesach. And the Gemara Yerushalmi actually gives a very specific reason for this. It describes in very I don't want to say vulgar terms, but describes that a person who eats matzah on Erev Pesach is like someone who has relations with his fiance in his father-in-law's house. In other words, that he couldn't wait until the night, until they actually married. They couldn't wait to consummate the relationship. And so the question is, why do we not eat matzah on Erev Pesach? Why? So there's a few different reasons that are brought. So the Meiri suggests that Chazal prohibited eating matzah on Erev Pesach to make sure that we still had an appetite, that we were still hungry for matzah later on the night of Pesach. The Rambam has a different, slightly different interpretation, and he suggests that this is related to the fact that we want the Seder to be distinctive. It's not just that we want you to have an appetite. The Rambam says that we want whatever is going to happen at that night to be distinctive. And if you're eating matzah the whole way through, all day long, leading up, because you can't eat chametz after when it hits the 11th hour, you can't eat chametz. So if you eat matzah, there'll be no distinction about the Seder itself. And the one last possibility, which is written by the Rokeach, is that we know that there's this deep connection between the matzah and the Korban Pesach. The Afikomen, for example, the matzah of the Afikomen takes the place of the Korban Pesach, in a sense. And so in the same way, the Korban Pesach was only eaten at night, therefore a person should only eat matzah at night as well and should not eat it during the day. So 3 different reasons why we don't eat matzah on Erev Pesach. Now, one just side piece of this, based on this Rokeach, is the question is, from when is a person not allowed to eat matzah? Normally we calculate, when does a Jewish day start? A Jewish day starts in the evening. So if I say to you that you're not allowed to eat matzah on Erev Pesach, does that mean from the night before, or does that mean on the day of? So the Orchos Chaim suggests that it actually comes from the night of Erev Pesach, which in other words means on Thursday night already a person should not eat matzah according to Orchos Chaim. But most of the Rishonim, most of the commentaries suggest that it doesn't refer to the night, but rather to the morning of Erev Pesach. Now, just generally speaking, there's a custom not to eat matzah for the month before Pesach anyways, again, to keep the taste special. And there's nothing quite as memorable as like that first bite of matzah on Seder night. Who doesn't look forward to eating some delicious, hard, and stale cardboard? You look forward to it every year, right? Or my favorite part of the Seder is Korach, which I refer to as the Korach Crunch, because right after everyone washes, you've got everyone sits there and they make hamotzi, and everyone's enjoying, and you're starting to loosen up a little bit, starting to bring the food to the table, and everyone's chatting. We're getting ready. We have our maror. Everyone's chatting. Oh, so bitter, not so bitter, right? And then we get our korach sandwich. Everyone's working and talking, and then suddenly we make the bracha. We say Zecher L'Mikdash Kehillel. We remind ourselves of the Beit HaMikdash and what the Hillel used to do, that he would take matzah and maror and would put them together. And then there's this beautiful moment that I describe as the Korach Crunch, where everybody at the same moment goes crunch, and there's just absolute silence as everybody enjoys their delicious sandwich. It's my favorite part of the whole Seder. But in any case, the general accepted opinion, and Reb Chaim Brisker actually writes about this, is that it refers to that it's the day of, not the night of. The day of is when we can't eat matzah at the minimum. So that means that eating chametz this year, on this coming Shabbat, a week from the Shabbat, raises a number of practical problems. Some are practical, some halachic. So let's identify a few of them. So what does a person do with their leftover chametz? Let's say you take option 1 and you choose to eat rolls. You go to Ricky's, you get some tiny little challah rolls, and you eat those challah rolls, you get a giant challah, but you have leftover challah. What do you do with your leftover challah on Pesach. On Erev Pesach, which is Shabbos. Can't burn it, so what do you do with it? Another question is cooking food for that Shabbat. What utensils can you use to cook food? You can't cook. You can cook food in your chametz dishes, for example, but that causes all types of problems because if you're going to warm it up, or you're going to use a hot plate or something like that, you're going to be heating up chametz food right next to your Pesach food. So how are you going to make a meal? So do you have to make a chametz only, a Pesach meal on Shabbos or not? Or another example is what do you do with the pots? Let's say you made a chametz meal and you filled up pots. I don't know, you made some chicken in a pot, and now you're done. You ate it all. You finished all your chametz in time, but what do you do with your pot? Well, on one practical issue is you seemingly already koshered your sinks. It's already kosher. You can't kosher it on Shabbat, right? So it's already been koshered. So how do you clean this pot? You can't clean it in your sink. And more than that, once you finish using a pot on Shabbat, it has no purpose anymore, and therefore it can become muksa, and it can't be used. You can't touch it even once it's done. So what do you do with these extra pots that have chametz in it, these chametz pots, right? And then the biggest question, which I keep alluding to, is what do you do Sudash Lishit, which is eaten usually in the afternoon, usually right before mincha or right after mincha. So at that point, the time for eating chametz is long since passed. So even if you want to suggest that you're going to do an early meal for lunch and you're going to have chametz early, you're going to make an early lunch, what do you do about Sudash Lishit? Right, so those are some of the practical questions that we have to solve for this year. So let's work on Lecha Mishnah first. Let's talk about eating using 2 loaves. So one solution to doing this would be to use egg matzah. We said you can't eat matzah because you can't eat matzah on Erev Pesach. So solution one is something called egg matzah, known also as Matzah Ashira. Does anyone know what is egg matzah? Anyone know? So egg matzah is matzah that is made not just with flour and water, but egg matzah is matzah that's made often with fruit juices as well. That's how it's made, or maybe eggs or something like that. Now, it's very important I say this, not all egg matzah is kosher for Passover. Some egg matzah is actually chametz. That's very important. So if you take from this that you're going to go the path of using egg matzah for your 2 loaves of bread on Shabbat, make sure you get kosher for Passover, or appropriate egg matzah, I should say. So let's look at the Gemara, which introduces us to this idea of Matzah Ashira. So the Gemara says as follows, Gemara Pesachim. So Rabbi Kiva Omer, matzot riba. So there is a repetition of the word matzot in the text. And imkain, so Rabbi Kiva teaches, what do we learn from the fact that it says matzah twice? So imkain matal melomer lechem oni. So if you say it says matzahs twice, and we have a good reason that it teaches us that all types of matzah can be eaten on Pesach. So what does the Torah need to tell us? That's lechem oni, that it's poor man's bread. So Rabbi Kiva teaches pra'al isa shenilusha b'yayin v'shemen udvash. It comes to exclude bread or matzah that was made, dough that was made with wine, oil, or honey, which is known again as matzah ashira. So Gemara says here is talking about a case where we needed a dough with wine, oil, or honey, or eggs, or something like that, and that's this egg matzah situation. And so lechem oni means poor man's bread, and so if it's poor man's bread, so it can't have this extra stuff according to Rabbi Kiva. So my time at Rabbi Kiva, why does he say this? Miktiv lechem oni, ani ktiv. It doesn't say that it's oni in the sense of poor man, it says ani. And what does that mean? Which without a vav, meaning, sorry, what's the reason for Rabbi Kiva? Gemara explains it's written in the text of lechem oni with a vav. So that would allude to the comparison of matzah food eaten by an onain and a mourner, as also spelled with a vav, and it's actually written lechem oni, which means poor man's bread, and therefore it shouldn't be used. So Rabbi Yosef argues, mi karina ani, oni karina. We don't say ani, we say oni. Rabbi Kiva haida karina and be oni kidishmo. He holds like shmuel dam or shmuel lechem oni. Lechem she'oni ma'alav very marbe. Very famous line here that is called lechem oni. Lechem oni refers to the fact that it's the bread in which we recite things over, refers to the saying of the Passover Seder. And so, again, this is a long piece of Gemara. I had to cut it down to make it all fit on the page here. But the Gemara asks, does Rabbi Akiva maintain with regard to dough that was kneaded with wine, oil, or honey that it may not be used for matzah? That it can't be used? Don't we see in a brayso that one may not knead dough on Passover with wine, oil, or honey? And if one kneaded dough in this manner, Rabbi Gamliel says, the dough must be burned immediately because it's leavened faster than other types of dough. And the rabbis say that although it's leavened quickly, one may still prevent it from being leavened. And if he does so, it may be eaten. And Rabbi Akiva said it was my Shabbat to serve before Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yeshua during Passover. And I kneaded them dough with wine, oil, and honey. And they said nothing to me by way of objection. In other words, that it was totally okay. Now, the Rishonim actually take two opposite views as to whether or not fruit juice renders dough chametz. So Rashi rules over here. Rashi says that fruit juice does render chametz, does turn dough into chametz, and therefore any matzah which is needed with it is forbidden. And therefore a person should not use such dough, should not use matzah ashira, should not use what we call egg matzah. On the other hand, the Rambam has a different interpretation. The Rambam, as well as others, write that fruit juice without water does not render dough chametz at all. Even if the dough would rise, it's not a problem. In other words, the issue is, as you can read it here, if we need these 5 species of grain, sorry, I can make it a little bigger, I just realized, without any water, they will never come to be leavened. Rather, even if they're left out all day and the dough rises, they're permissible to eat. Because fruit juice does not leaven, but rather causes decay. So there's a debate here about whether or not fruit juice has the ability to leaven. The Rambam says so long as there's no water would be a leavening agent with the fruit juice. So if it's just fruit juice, it's not going to leaven and therefore would be permissible to use. Now the Shulchan Aruch rules as follows: Mei perot below mayim ein machmitzin klal umuter lachol b'Pesach Matzah shenosho b'mei peros. So fruit juice without water does not leaven at all, and it is permitted to eat on Pesach matzah, which was kneaded with fruit juice, even afilu shaita kol hayom, even though if it was sitting there all day. Aval ein yotze ba'yedei chovato mipnei she matzah ashira kara k'tiv lechem oni. This is considered like a matzah ashira, and the verse refers to lechem oni, poor man's bread, not rich dough or more substantial dough, and therefore a person should not use it. So again, according to the Mechaber, according to the Shulchan Aruch, a person can, yes, you may eat egg matzah throughout Pesach, assuming that it was, again, kosher Pesach. You just cannot fulfill your obligation at all. You can't fulfill your obligation. The Ramah has a very different interpretation. The Ramah argues, and he disagrees, and he says that matzah should not be kneaded with fruit juices at all. B'medinos elu ein nohagin lalush shemei peros afilu liktof matzot ein nohagin rak la'achar fiatan ba'oden chamin ve'in l'shanot im lo b'shat hadchak l'tzorchei chola o zaken etzarech laza. The only exception, he says, would be for elderly people or those who are sick or anything like that. So again, everybody agrees that a person cannot fulfill their obligation. A person can't be yotze matzah, the mitzvah of matzah at the Seder, with egg matzah, but there's a debate about whether or not it can be eaten at all. In other words, is it chametz or not? And the Ramah seemingly takes a stringent approach and says that a person should not eat egg matzah, which means that if you wanted to take egg matzahs to fulfill your obligation, that would be a problem to do so later in the day. So again, in practice, many of the Achronim forbid eating matzah shira once the time has come that you can no longer eat matzah, and it would seem to be preferable to not use it at all. However, if a person wanted to use egg matzah, then they can, in theory, use egg matzah for the first 2 meals, but not for Sudat Shlushit. And again, those first 2 meals would be eaten earlier before the time of chametz, and that's in practice how most people hold. I'll just make mention of the fact that Rav Hershel Schachter just recently came out with a new psak, based on a rereading of the Ramah, which perhaps would in fact allow someone to eat egg matzah on Erev Pesach, and that is what he will do. And so there is a shita, there is a good shoulders to stand on for those who want to use egg matzah on Erev Pesach to fulfill the obligation of Lechem Mishnah. Everyone with me so far? Yes, no, maybe so? Okay, so that's egg matzah. That's egg matzah. Now, if a person is going to use bread instead, so it has to be done in a specific way. You should be making sure that you're eating you should be eating early so that you finish bread in time. How do we get rid of the bread? We could either grind it up into our hands carefully and throw it into the wind, or alternatively, another way a person can do it would be to flush it down the toilet, or you can maybe put it into a trash bag and put it into your garbage can, take your garbage can and move it off your property. Those are all things that a person could do to remove the extra chametz that they have. A simpler approach would be to just find 2 small Ricky's rolls, something that a person could eat easily and make sure you consumed all your chametz. But it's so important that you eat it at a table where there's no Pesach utensils. You use only disposable goods. Use a plastic tablecloth. Take it all and throw it away, because the last thing you need is chametz all over your house on Air of Pesach, and then you'll have a major problem come Pesach itself. And so that is what's done. This is the reason why in Shul next Shabbat, davening will be, I believe, at 7:45 in the morning, and only at 7:45 in the morning. And the idea is to give people enough time to get home and to eat their meals. And if they want to eat chametz, that they can eat bread before the time for chametz comes out, around 11 o'clock in the morning, I believe it is. Now, what do we do about Sudah Shlishi? What is the situation when it comes to the third meal? So the obligation for the third meal comes from a Gemara in Shabbos. I'm going to share the screen with you here. Let's find it here. Gemara in Shabbos says, Taner Rabbanan, Kama Sudah Chayav Adam Lechol b'Shabbos. How many meals must a person eat on Shabbat? So the Gemara answer is simple: 3, shalosh. So Rabbi Chidka argues, says Arba. He says it's 4. Amar Yochanan. They both learn it from the same pasuk. The pasuk says, "Vayomer Moshe." Moshe said, "Ichluhu hayom ki Shabbat hayom Hashem hayom lo timtzauhu basadeh." So Moshe says, "Eat it today, for today's Shabbat for Hashem. Today you're not going to find anything in the fields. You should eat it specifically today." Rabbi Chidka savar hani tlata hayom levar meorta. Rabbanan savri bahadi deorta. So Rabbi Chidka says there's 3 mentions of the word today, hayom, in the verse. Alludes to 3 meals we need to eat. And the rabbis hold that these 3 mentions include the evening meal as well. And so that's where they get 3. And whereas Rabbi Chidka says there's 3 plus the evening meal, which would give you 4. So this is the obligation. This is where it comes from, that we do 3 meals on Shabbat. So there's a major machloka, a major disagreement amongst the commentaries as to what a person should eat at this third meal. So Tosfos argues that all the meals are equal, right? And therefore you have to have bread at the third meal. The Rush disagrees with that and says that a person can fulfill their obligation with any food from any of the 5 species of grain, right? Tosfos argues and brings another opinion that talks about that you can maybe fulfill your obligation with meat or fish, but not fruit. And others suggest, desserts or maybe just fruit itself. So those are many different possibilities about how we fulfill Sudah Shlishit. Just by way of just a side note, back in the olden times, pre-COVID, when we would have shalashidus at shul, the joke was that nobody would have bread. We never could find people to wash so we can make a mazuman. Well, here's the thing. Really, a person should have bread. There's a machloka, whether you have to have lechem mishnah or just some bread at your meal. But we see here that there is a real significance of having that meal. You should at least eat something, some fruit, or at least maybe some type of mazonos, something from one of the 5 grains. You should eat something for that third meal. So again, what do we do on the third meal come for this coming Shabbat, a week from Shabbat, where...
But you also have to be careful, though, because of the requirement of being hungry.
Yes, we're about to get to that. Correct. So, in addition, we have other issues. Shulchan Aruch rules stringently that we need to eat the third meal for Shabbat. So that Shlishit needs to be eaten only after 6.5 hours in the day. So you can't eat it early. So that poses its own challenges as well. And so when we put all this together for Erev Pesach, which falls on Shabbat, it really becomes almost impossible to fulfill the mitzvah of Sudah Shlishit in the best way possible. Because we also know that, like Irvin just mentioned, that we can't eat as it gets too close to Pesach because we want to be hungry for the Suda and for the Matzah. And we also can't have any chametz, so that takes out a lot of options. And we also just talked about the issue of Matzah Ashira and eating Matzah in general. So all these present major problems for how to deal with this. And so there are really several possibilities. So one is brought down by the Shulchan Aruch, who says that there are those who are lenient, like I said, about eating matzah ashira until the end of the 4th hour. And so you can use matzah ashira potentially. That's one possibility. We talked about the Ramah who did not do this, and therefore felt Seudah Shlishit should be fulfilled in other ways, with fruit or meat or fish or something like that. So have like some tuna in the afternoon, or have a bowl of fruit. And then the Maharam adopts a different solution than what I just suggested, which is that he would only really eat it on fruit and fulfill his obligation in that way. And so Lemaisa for us today, so we have a few different possible ways to do it. One is, like I said, fruit or fish in the afternoon, or alternatively, a person could adjust their meal in the morning and could interrupt their meal, go for a walk outside and come back and have bread and just have Seudah Shlishit early. You would not fulfill all the opinions, because there are some opinions who suggest that you have to eat it in the afternoon after the 6.5 hours of the day, but at least you could fulfill the opinion of eating bread. So you do it in the morning. And so all of this, to summarize, was sent out via email and I think mailing to our membership. And I can email that to anybody who wants the details. But certainly, if you like to eat a full Seudah Shlishit with bread, so you'll daven at 7:45, you'll come home, you'll wash, you'll eat a little bit of bread, enough to make hamotzi, to bench on, you'll bench, you'll get up, take a walk, come back again, wash again, and eat bread again. And that would be how you'd fulfill 3 meals if you want to do it with bread. Or alternatively, you could just have your early lunch meal and then eat later in the day some fish or some fruit, like the Maharam suggests, Maharam of Württemberg, and do it as that. And in fact, let me just share with you, let me share one last thing with you as we wrap up. So the Maharam of Württemberg said when the 14th of Nisan fell on Shabbat, the Maharam would eat Seudah Shlishit at his table in the morning, and towards the evening, he would eat some fruit. And for perhaps he didn't fulfill his obligation when he ate Seudah Shlishit in the morning before Mincha Gedola, before 6.5 hours into the day. According to Rabbi Tam, maintaining Seudah Shlishit should be eaten only after Mincha Gedola. So according to the Maharam, a person should eat fruit later in the day, as well as to do this crazy thing where you eat, bench, take a walk, come back, and eat again as well. And so we've covered a lot of the different laws here about Erev Pesach that comes on Shabbat. We talked about the sale of chametz. We talked about the burning of the chametz. We talked about how on Shabbat itself, once the time comes after we finish our meal, if we have bread, that we should also say the kol chamira v'chamia, that we need to also do bittul chametz as well on Shabbat, even though we're not going to burn and destroy the chametz. If we have leftover chametz on Shabbat that we did not yet consume at our meal, like some leftover bread, we talked about how to get rid of it. But by and large, there is just, it is a very memorable year, and we should try to do our best to follow all these different customs and practices. And I'll just conclude by talking about that, generally speaking, Erev Pesach is like the busiest day of the year. We're all running and rushing. We're burning our chametz, trying to make final preparations. And it will be the same case this year as well on Friday, running before Shabbat. But we've been given this amazing gift of Shabbat leading into Pesach. Shabbat is a Yom Menucha, a Yom of rest. And so let us all use this Shabbat, this time leading into Pesach, this Erev Pesach on Shabbat, where there's no rushing, there's no phone calls, there's no preparations. It's all been done already. Let's use it to prepare spiritually for the Seder. Let's use it to open up a Haggadah before the Seder actually begins, familiarize ourselves with it, look up some new Divrei Torah, and really spiritually prepare. Maybe it's something that we don't have time to do with normally because we're so busy getting ready on Erev Pesach. This year, let's take advantage. Instead of looking at it as, wow, it's going to be such a hard and challenging year, let's take advantage of the extra time that we have, the quiet time, the Shabbat Kodesh, the Holy Shabbat, to prepare for Pesach. And with that, I wish all of you a Chag Kosher Sameach. And
Same to you, Rabbi.
I encourage you to join us Monday night and throughout Pesach for other programs as we make this a meaningful Pesach. So stay well and have a wonderful Pesach.